Welcome back. Before we start creating pipelines in Synapse, I would like to take you through the components that are required to create a pipeline. We're going to take the bottom-up approach to explain the concepts here. Any kind of action we want to perform in a data project will usually require access to data from some kind of storage, such as Data Lake SQL database, Cosmos DB, etc. Also, the other important resource that we need is compute that could be provided by a Synapse resources, for example, serverless SQL pool or Spark pool, or even a compute engine outside of Synapse, such as Azure, Databricks, Insight, etc. Also, it could be the serverless compute provided by the Synapse pipeline itself. When we create a pipeline in Synapse, Synapse needs to know how to access these resources. Let it be the storage or the compute. For this, we need to create a component called linked service. It merely has the connection information to one of these resources. Link service is the place where you specify the URL of the resource you are trying to access and the credential that provides the access. When talking about storage, we may want to define the structure of the file, the name of the file within the container, etc. This kind of information can be stored in another component called dataset. Using the connection information, we may want to execute a compute process. For example, we may want to execute one of the SQL stored procedures that we created using the serverless SQL pool. For this, we can use a component called activity. Synapse provides a number of activities. For example, there is the stored procedure activity, database, notebook activity, HD Insight, Hive activity, etc. Apart from these computers such as Databricks and Insight, Synapse pipelines can also offer a number of activities using its own serverless compute capacity. Examples of these are things like copy activity, which copies data from one form of storage to another, validation activity, which checks to see if a file has arrived, and the list goes on. This activity just needs to be fed with the dataset details, but they don't require a compute connection detailed, i.e. link services. So now we know that activities perform tasks, but they are not executable. In order to execute an activity, we need a pipeline. A pipeline may have one or more activities. It can also create dependencies between them. Finally, we wouldn't want to execute the pipelines manually. We would want them to be scheduled to run at regular intervals or when an event happens. That's what triggers do. They invoke the pipelines as and when they need to be invoked. These are the major components of the Synapse integration pipeline. Just to summarize, pipeline is the only executable component amongst the various components we talked about. A trigger can invoke a pipeline to run at regular intervals based on an event. A pipeline may execute one or more activities. Our dataset defines the metadata about the data in files or tables. And finally, a linked service holds the connection information about a storage or a compute resource. I hope you now have an understanding about the various Synapse integration components. In the forthcoming lessons, we'll build pipelines in Synapse to strengthen our understanding.